Welcome back to World Religions, a video series to accompany a semester-long Survey of World Religions course, specifically with the textbook A Short Introduction to World Religions, edited by Christopher Partridge. Chapter 12, African Indigenous Religions. In antiquity, all of Africa practiced indigenous religions before the coming of Christianity and Islam. Christianity actually came early to Africa. Some of the earliest Christian communities were in Egypt. There are still significant numbers of Coptic Christians there. And also in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was one of the first kingdoms to convert to Christianity. But Africa remained largely indigenous religions until the spread of Islam starting in the 7th to 8th centuries AD. And later in the era of European colonialism of Africa in the 18th to 20th centuries AD, Catholic and Protestant Christianity spread more as well. On the map of religions in Africa, the prevalent religion by national subdivision is shown. So these are territorial units smaller than nation states. And the darkness of the color or the darkness of the shade of the color indicates the percentage of people who follow that religion. So green is Islam, red is Catholic Christianity, blue is Protestant Christianity. And you can see a few areas of purple, that is Orthodox Christianity in Ethiopia primarily, and also light brown. The shades of light brown are of indigenous religions. These religions are only practiced in a few pockets of Africa. Today you can see in West Africa, some pockets of brown in Eastern Africa, and also in Southern Africa. However, this is somewhat misleading because there are smaller groups of indigenous religionists mixed into the majority Muslim, Catholic, and Protestant areas as well. It's also the case, though, that what we call indigenous religions have been greatly influenced by Christianity and Islam. Also, Islam and Christianity are rapidly displacing indigenous African religions, so it's even possible they could mostly die out within a few generations. There's great diversity of African indigenous religions, with each tribe or each linguistic community having its own or having had its own religion. Vodun is a religion practiced by several West African peoples, including the Aja, Iwi, and Fon, in the modern nations of Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. It's related to Haitian Vodou, which is a syncretistic religion, or a religion that blends multiple traditions. With regard to Haitian Vodou, it is Roman Catholicism and these West African religions corresponding to modern Vodou. You can see in the picture a Vodou dancer garbed to represent a spirit. In Vodou, there are many gods and spirits that are also called Vodou. Mawu is a moon goddess and a creator. Lisa is the sun god. He's the god of the daytime, heat, light, strength. Legba is the youngest son of Mawu, and he's actually the chief or king of all the Vodun spirits. You often have to contact him, go through him to get to another spirit. His symbol is an erect phallus, and you can see that depicted in the statue on the right, where Legba sits in front of a sinner judging them. There's also Dawn, the rainbow serpent, who's androgynous, a son or child of Mawu, and Dawn acts as a messenger or intermediary with the gods. Zangbeto are an interesting phenomenon. The term means men of the night or night watchmen, and they basically function as a nighttime police force, traditionally anyway, among the Ogu people of southwestern Nigeria. They're connected with the Vodun religion, though. So you can see the man dressed up in a costume that covers him entirely. It looks like the types of ceremonial costumes also used in Vodun rituals, where a person is being possessed or embodied, they're embodying a spirit, a deity. So according to the tradition, when a man wears that costume, they enter into a trance. They're actually possessed by the spirits, and it's the spirits controlling their bodies that are supposed to look for thieves and witches that might be prowling around in the night. Another ethnic group of Africa is the Congo. These are from Central Africa, in and around the nation of Democratic Republic of the Congo. And these are actually a Bantu ethnic group. The Bantu are a larger linguistic family that have spread throughout much of Africa in the last few centuries through a series of migrations. But their religion consists of devotion to Inkisis, which can mean either a spirit or a material object that contains a spirit. Also important to Congo religion is the N'anga, or diviner. We'll see a story of an interview with an N'anga later in the chapter, although that's an N'anga from another Bantu group in Zimbabwe. Simbi is a water spirit, and oftentimes spirits of water or rivers are very important in African religions, and that's also true of the Kongo religion. Another interesting concept from Kongo religion is the Kalunga line, which is a river or a watery border between the realm of the living, called Ku Nseke, and the spirit realm or land of the dead, called Ku Mpemba. You can see in this diagram on the right, which is called the Bakongo cosmogram, Bakongo for the language of the Congo people, that Kalunga River in the middle dividing the top from the bottom, the physical world from the spirit world. One thing I will say about this diagram is I'm pretty sure it's a relatively recent or modern design. I've seen some evidence from a study that there are centuries old versions of this that are much simpler, that just essentially have the cross and the circle. And this apparently was a symbol used by people in the Kongo religion for centuries. But this modern version, where you have the 4 seasons, the 4 directions, the 4 elements, the 4 colors, you may notice that those 4 colors, white, black, red, and yellow, are also those used in the quartered circle in native North American religion. I'm pretty sure a lot of the details of this are a modern construction influenced by other traditions. Not to say that it's not authentic, but just keep that in mind. Oftentimes when we're presented with indigenous religions, even though they usually have their origins in antiquity, the modern presentation or the modern version of it can be of more recent vintage, so to speak. And I think that's probably true with this case. But certainly the notion of the Kalunga River and of the overall cosmogram or cross is pretty old. The Yoruba are a people of West Africa from southwestern Nigeria, and their religion is also quite influential, along with Vodun, because it has influenced the syncretistic religions of a lot of African descended peoples in the New World, including in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, and parts of South America as well. Religions such as Haitian Vodun and Santeria have been influenced by West African religions like that of the Yoruba. So the beings worshipped in Yoruba religion are called Orishas, which are gods or spirits. And these are sometimes divided into 2 main categories, Tutu and Gibigbona. The Tutu are gentle or mild spirits, and when they appear in rituals, they're often associated with the color white. The Gibigbona spirits are bold, more aggressive, and they can be represented by red or black in rituals. Orun is the spirit world or land of the dead in Yoruba religion, and there aren't that many large shrines or temple structures, but one of them is Osun Osogbo, a sacred grove along a river, which you can see here in the picture. Another important aspect of Yoruba religion is large public festivals. One of the most famous is actually now mainly used as a tourist attraction, the Ayo Festival. It was traditionally performed to escort the soul of a deceased king. And so it still has the elements of the original religious ceremony to it. So a bit more about the Orishas. Olorun, or also known as Olodumare, is the supreme creator who created the world and the other Orishas. The picture is actually from a park in Brazil that has several statues of Orishas. And even though Brazil is a majority Catholic nation, there have been some forms of West African syncretic religion practiced there, which I believe is why the Orisha statues appear in that particular park. Obatala was another Orisha given the task to create the world, but unfortunately he got drunk on palm wine. Later he was deputized with creating humans instead, which he basically did, but he made them out of clay and left them for different amounts of time in the fire, which is why humans have different skin colors, according to Yoruba belief. Oduduwa is a younger brother of Obatala who later outshone him. He's depicted as a god, as an Orisha, but also as a human king, ruler of the city of Ifa, which is an ancient Yoruba city, which I think dates back in some accounts to around the 10th century BC, so pretty ancient. And he was sent by Olorun to create the world after Obatala had failed. He succeeded where Obatala had failed, thus leading to the world. This is the face of a statue from Ifa, which may have been intended to represent the Orisha Oduduwa. And finally, Oshun is a river goddess. So there are many important goddesses often associated with rivers. There are hundreds of Orishas. They're variously numbered, usually with a symbolic number, like 401 is a common one. But this is a list of some of the important ones, and it gives you a kind of sense of what these deities are like. This sculpture is either of the goddess herself or of a devotee worshiper of the goddess. Now, moving on to southern Africa, there are a variety of different tribes and cultures and languages spoken there, but several cultures of southern Africa, such as the Zulu, have a type of ritual expert called a Sangoma. You can see some in the picture here. And they are like shamans. They specialize in healing, divination. They will also help you counteract witchcraft or sorcery that's been directed against you. There's another class of ritual experts in southern Africa called the N'anga, and these are herbalists who make medicines from plants and animals. So this is the only thing I'm really taking from the textbook that I mentioned earlier, to be honest. So the author of the chapter on African religions, James Cox, most of the chapter is just an attempt to briefly summarize the main characteristics of African indigenous religions without giving that many examples. And honestly, I don't think it works that well. You can give someone a generic abstract summary of religions, but it doesn't give you as much of a sense than just a few telling or representative examples. So that's why I focused on giving a few examples, even though it doesn't really do the subject justice, because there's so many religions, and each religion of Africa has its own elaborate pantheon of gods and ritual experts and so on. But the end of the chapter by Cox is actually pretty good. It's fieldwork from Zimbabwe from 1992, an interview with an N'anga, or a traditional healer. So the subject of his interview was a 50-year-old woman who functioned as a spirit medium. In other words, she'd be possessed by and thus could serve as a conduit of another spirit. And specifically, it was of her deceased father. And her mediumship only began after a long illness of hers. And it was in the midst of a ritual prescribed by another N'anga. During that ritual, the woman became possessed by the spirit of her deceased father, and then she recovered from the illness. But ever after, she acted as the spirit medium for her father's spirit, and people in the region would come to her with their problems, whether they were sick, whether they had poor crops, whether there was a death in their family, whether they had infertility or problems with school. They brought her their personal problems. She would speak to her father, go into a trance, and her father would use her body as a vessel to talk to the person and tell them the source of their problem and what to do about it. So the interviewer is a Western scholar, right? So he's coming from a different perspective outside of the context of the culture, and that creates some awkwardness in his interaction with the spirit medium. So he asks her a lot of kind of theoretical questions, like, how does your father take control of you? And her answer is just, he does. And she gets kind of apparently confused, maybe a little flustered by some of his questions, but that actually triggers her to become possessed by the spirit of her father. And at one point, her father's spirit asks, who is this man? Why is he asking you all these questions? Or something to that effect. Now, the N'anga shown in the picture is not the one who was actually the subject of this interview, but he was another N'anga from the same region, from Zimbabwe. When the N'anga was possessed by her father's spirit, her whole demeanor and appearance changed. She put on different clothing, the skirt of animal skins, the hat of eagle feathers. There was a black cloth over her shoulders and around her waist. She wore rattles on the sides of her legs. She had a dark walking stick about 3 feet long with designs on the top, and she walked differently with heavy steps like a man and spoke in a deep voice. So this is fairly typical for a diviner or shaman who goes into a trance. They'll often embody physically the characteristics of whatever god or spirit they're channeling. So in the case of this scholar who was interviewing the medium, she was actually able to answer a concrete, specific question he had about a wallet that he had lost earlier in his trip. And after that interaction, the spirit departed, and the spirit's parting words, rather, was, I'm returning to a mountain near Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe is an ancient city in the modern nation of Zimbabwe, and it has spiritual significance in some of the indigenous religions there. You can see in the photograph on this slide is that other N'anga from Zimbabwe, and apparently this picture was taken from pretty close to Great Zimbabwe. So after the spirit possession, when asked by the interviewer, the medium claimed to not remember what had happened when she was possessed. And that's also fairly common. So in that trance state, the person's normal personality goes away. They get the personality of the god or spirit who talks through them, and then they get out of the state, but they don't remember what happened during it. Okay, thus concludes our brief summary of African indigenous religions. So that's the end of part 2 of our Survey of World Religions course, Indigenous Religions. Next up is part 3, a Introduction to Hinduism. Until next time.